Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those joining us from China. My name is Jana Psarska, and I'm a policy manager for international trade at Tech UK. Welcome to today's second session of CBBC's Net Zero webinar series titled UK-China Collaboration and the Path to Net Zero. Just to set the scene, as the host country for COP26 this year and major G7 nation, the UK is set to play a critical role in driving the net zero agenda. China is also a critical partner in contributing to emissions reductions targets, having made the commitment to become net zero by 2060. There are growing opportunities for collaboration in net zero tech between the two nations. In today's session, we will explore the key role that technology and innovation is playing in the path to net zero and where both countries, UK and China, can work together to achieve these goals. This event is hosted as a London Tech Week Fringe event and is a part of the UK-China Tech Forum. For those not familiar with the forum, it's jointly hosted by Tech UK and China Britain Business Council. And it's a platform to allow businesses to engage with key stakeholders in government and business in areas of UK-China tech trade, policy, and market growth in both countries. The forum is for representatives of businesses, government, and other stakeholders interested in influencing or understanding the policy landscape, impacting the technology sector, trade relations, and the market opportunities and challenges in China and the UK. We would like to also thank to our supporting partners, which are the Department for International Trade and Tech London Advocates, particularly the Tech London Advocate China Working Group. Before we start with the session, I would like to just run through a number of housekeeping rules, and I'm sure you are all familiar with those by now. So you are all muted by default. There is a Q&A function, and I encourage you to post any questions that you might have related to the topic. We will try to tackle as many as possible of those questions at the end of each session. The event is also being recorded, so we can share the webinar recording after the session. As already mentioned, the event is the second in a campaign of events on net zero being organized by CBBC. In fact, the second session is taking place tomorrow on clean transportation, followed by the event on green finance, and then the last event in October on nature. You can keep updated and read more information about the events on the CBBC website, or get in touch with my colleagues at CBBC or Mark Headley, from who you will hear later today. Yes, just a quick rundown through the agenda. So we are very happy today to be joined by a number of distinguished speakers. We are joined today by Russ Shaw, who is founder of London Tech Advocates, and will provide welcoming remarks, followed by keynote address by Tony Clemson, Deputy Director at DIT, and Rafi Cohen, Director of Climate Risk and Decarbonization Strategy at KPMG. We will have two sessions. The first one will explore UK-China partnerships in the path to net zero, followed by the second session, the second panel discussion, which will explore the role innovation and emerging technologies play in tackling the climate change. Okay, so as mentioned before, obviously there is a Q&A function that you can use to pose any questions that you might have. And now I would like to welcome the first speaker that we have today to provide welcoming remarks. Russ Shaw, founder of Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates. He originally founded Tech London Advocates in 2013 to ensure independent voice of the technology community is heard, with the focus on the private sector. He's also championing London as a global tech hub and campaigning to address some of the biggest challenges facing tech companies in the UK. Welcome, Russ. and the floor is yours.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Jana, and it's great to have everybody here this morning. Welcome to the UK-China Tech Forum, which really focuses on COP26 and net zero tech as part of London Tech Week. As Jana said, my name is Russ Shaw, founder of Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates, and alongside Informa and London and Partners, Tech London Advocates is a founding partner of London Tech Week, which is now in its 8th year. Net zero tech has already been discussed a great deal during London Tech Week. Our Global Tech Advocates group, which includes Tech China Advocates, held a Tech for Net Zero event on Monday with over 20 networks in our Global Tech Advocates community participating from Asia through Europe to the Americas. Yesterday, the Climate Tech Summit took place throughout the day as one of our anchor events with deep dives on the topic. And obviously, this is clearly one of the most critical issues facing the planet, and developing ways for collaboration between UK and China on net zero tech must be a top priority for both nations. So really delighted to have this event as part of London Tech Week. Thank you for including us. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to you, Jana.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you for setting the scene for further discussions and also other keynote speakers that we have today. And as you mentioned, it's I think really it's a prime time to have these discussions, obviously in the run up to COP26 later this year. So thank you for that, Russ. And now I would like to give floor to Tony Clemson, who is Deputy Director for Innovation and Industry at the IT China. He's been in this role since December 2019, and in his role, Tony promotes greater cooperation between the UK and China in the technology and advanced manufacturing sectors. He previously served as Deputy Consul General in Shanghai from 2016 to 2019, and in prior diplomatic roles, Tony covered international cybersecurity policy in London and political and economic issues in South Korea and New Zealand. Welcome, Tony, and I'll pass over to you now.
Thank you, Jana, and good morning to everyone in the UK. Good afternoon to those of us in China, and happy Mid-Autumn Festival to everyone for yesterday. As Jana said, I'm based in China, working for Department for International Trade, leading on technology and advanced manufacturing. For those that don't know, the Department for International Trade has around 200 expert trade advisors across China, working to support British and Chinese businesses to do more together. So if you don't know your local DIT representative, then do get in touch. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'd like to start by thanking Tech UK and CBBC for organising this event, but also the UK-China Tech Forum series, which I think is really important. And I applaud the decision for a dedicated event on net zero. Tackling climate change remains the biggest challenge of our generation. It's bigger than COVID. It's bigger than the geopolitical issues that you may see on the news today. And the ultimate destination of net zero emissions has now been accepted. The only question remaining is how fast we will get there. And really on this journey, there's three things that are crystal clear to me. The first is that the tech industry has a key role to play in the global green transition. Secondly, that we need deeper international collaboration. And thirdly, that has to include China. China is at the same time the world's largest carbon emitter, more than the US and Europe put together. And it's also the world's largest investor in renewable energies. And of course, it is the key marketplace for developing and deploying the very technologies that will be needed to accelerate this transition. So I think this event could not be more timely and relevant, and I'm delighted that there's so many excellent speakers coming up. Now, governments have an important role in setting the framework for the drive to net zero. The UK government has set an economy-wide net zero emission target of 2050, and it's channeling investment into renewable energies, zero emission transport, energy efficient manufacturing, and green buildings. And technology is playing a key role in all of those areas. Internationally, as has already been mentioned, we've got the UN COP26 summit in Glasgow, and that aims to raise global ambition and also agree the rules for global cooperation. And it was great to see the COP26 president designate, Right Honourable Alex Sharma, here in China a couple of weeks ago to have negotiations with his Chinese counterparts. And as I'm sure you're aware, the Chinese government has announced that carbon emissions in China will peak by 2030 and reduce to zero by 2060. And whilst we all await more detailed plans, these goals have to be considered by all companies operating in China. Now, together, the UK and Chinese governments are delivering a series of bilateral dialogues, and all have the green transition and net zero as a key theme, a key priority. Recently, we held a ministerial science and technology dialogue. In coming weeks, there'll be an energy dialogue, and there's plans for ministerial dialogues on industry and digital technologies. These are great opportunities to share policies and information around the green transition, announce new initiatives, and provide a platform for businesses to engage with senior government. But whilst governments set the framework, it's really businesses that deliver the transition. And there's never been a better or more important time to invest in green technologies. And so I'm delighted to see that VC investment in the UK's sustainable technology companies has more than doubled over the past couple of years to well over £2 billion a year, which sees the UK placed third in the world behind the US and China. Working together, there are tremendous opportunities for UK-China technology collaboration in tackling climate change. AI, 5G, Internet of Things hold huge potential to improve the energy efficiency of transportation, manufacturing, infrastructure, and agriculture industries. Just two quick examples. Firstly, a report issued just last week from Vodafone and WPI Economics highlighted the role of digital technologies such as AI, machine learning, and green building solutions in delivering smart factories. And that these can reduce emissions by more than 3 million tonnes annually. And I've seen firsthand these being deployed in factories across China today. And the second example recognises that the ICT sector is also part of the problem as well as the solution. Take, for example, China's data centres, which use around 2% of the country's electricity, which is more than the city of Shanghai. And these data centres produce carbon emissions equivalent to a mid-sized nation. And so it's great to see that Bristol-based Graphcore is working with Chinese partners for zero carbon data centres, utilising clean energy and their energy efficient IPUs. And there's many more examples and opportunities ahead. So in finishing, I'd like to thank the organisers, thank the speakers and everyone participating online. I wish you all fruitful and productive discussions. And I encourage all of us to work together, both UK and China, both governments and businesses, to build a greener future for us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you for highlighting the importance of international collaboration and in meeting the net zero targets, and also how important it is actually to deploy emerging technologies in tackling the climate change and the role businesses have to play in meeting these goals. And I'm sure we will explore all of these topics throughout our panels later on. Let me now invite Rafi Cohen to share his take on UK-China net zero collaborations. Rafi Cohen is Director of Climate Risk and Decarbonization Strategy at KPMG. And in his role, he helps clients develop and implement their decarbonization strategies. His work also includes internal decarbonization, baselining of emissions, and developing and implementing the process of reducing them and integrating the impacts of decarbonization into organization strategy. So I will now invite Rafi you to share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Jana. Can I just confirm that you can see my slides?
We can, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's really good to be here. And I think this is a really important area for consideration around how we address the challenges of climate change. And just before we dig into the slides, there's a couple of points that I think are worth highlighting as key messages. The first is essentially climate is a very complex problem, but essentially it's a problem of global resource constraints. And technology is key in helping us to do more with less, as we've seen over the last number of years as technology across the board has accelerated. And there's no area that's more important than climate where we need to be able to do more with less. The second point is both climate and tech are two megatrends we're seeing in business and in the macro economy, and we'll continue to see over the coming years. So this intersection between the two topics is incredibly important. And finally, echoing some of the messages that Tony shared with us a short time ago, China is an incredibly important economy when it comes to climate change and decarbonisation, a large polluter, a large economy, but also the largest investor in climate-related technologies and developments. The UK has some of the strongest regulations in the world around climate, and that is driving a lot of activity here in the UK. And so bringing those two superpowers, if you like, together, there's really an opportunity, I think, to drive forward this agenda and generate value in all sorts of ways. So firstly, technology is a key enabler of climate action. I think this is something that probably we all know. It's key for solving difficult problems, particularly those that are rich in data. And climate is one of those topics. It's hugely complex and systems-wide, taking into account many, many different forces that are driving the general problems. But data is really key for addressing this and mitigating the complexity that means that we find it hard to understand what's going on and what the nature of the problem is, but also the solutions. And a few examples of this is around balancing the energy grid or reducing the costs of decarbonisation by understanding how we can develop better batteries, which would in turn, for example, bring electric vehicles down the cost curve. And at the bottom, I think there's a really important point when we think about data and tech. So data, we have a huge amounts of data in the world. We collect huge amounts, we have sensors everywhere, and many of those can be used to help address sub-problems of the climate challenge. But technology helps us move from data to insight and wisdom across a number of different key areas for addressing this challenge. And I think that's a really important point when we talk about technology, to understand that actually the purpose of technology in many ways is to transfer this data, the understanding of the world, into wisdom, what we can do, understanding how we can solve these problems, and then what we can do about them. And that leads me to kind of the three buckets of how we think about climate tech. The first bucket is around Earth observation. So really understanding the nature of the climate challenge, what's going on in the world. And now with satellite data, with machine learning tools, we can understand at scale and in real time what's going on in the world. So just to bring out one example of a company that's working around this, Climate Trace, which is now an international organization operating globally, enables businesses and governments to track emissions and track the sources of emissions across the whole of the globe. And that's really important for supporting international agreements, catching anyone who's cheating, and allowing both governments and businesses to sign up to agreements and ambitions and have faith that their competitors and others working in their space are also keeping to those agreements as well. The second bucket is around persuasion. So a key area here is actually behavior change. There's lots of technologies already in play that can help us address climate challenges and reduce emissions, but people aren't necessarily using them, people and businesses and governments. So persuasion is a key area where it's possible to change behavior and move the climate agenda forward relatively quickly. And of course, machine learning tools, AI, social media has been demonstrated to be incredibly powerful in doing this. And there's a huge education piece around climate for businesses, governments, and individuals as well. And persuasion would be really important, and personalizing that persuasion using machine learning tools is going to be a key part of the journey. And then finally, engineered solutions looks at actually increasing our capability using technology to address climate challenges. And this is the area really when most people talk about climate tech, they tend to focus. This relates to carbon capture and storage, to hydrogen power, but also more pure tech solutions like Climeworks, who run a large direct air capture capabilities, and organizations like Infogrid, which track changes going on across buildings in order to suggest opportunities to reduce emissions in the built environment. So bringing that all together and looking at a high level what's going on in the UK and China. As I mentioned earlier, the UK has incredibly strong regulations, but also it's the 6th largest climate hub globally, so significant in size, of course, not as large as China. But we have in the UK, we have quite a developed and mature segment or sector for VC investments into this space. Key drivers of this are from the regulatory side. So the UK was the first country to have a net zero target, even though it's in 2050, which is still a long time ago. We of course have leading universities and also a leader across the globe in deep tech investments in AI and materials and biotech, key areas they're going to drive the tech climate intersection. And of course, China is a huge economy with the 2nd largest global investment into climate tech already, with huge potential to pour more money into this area. So 33% of global VC funding in climate tech since 2013 was in China. But if we look at the size of the Chinese economy and the maturity of the sector in China, it's clear that China can be a key driver of climate tech and decarbonization solutions going forward. In the UK, particularly policy and regulatory drivers are really creating this growing market and movement for climate tech. So just to call out a couple of these, TCFT, which is an initiative from the Task Force for climate-related financial disclosures, is hugely increasing the visibility around how businesses see and address climate risk in their day-to-day operations and also in their strategy. And just by having that reporting framework coming in as a key policy or key regulation over the coming years is driving companies to think about climate in a different way, to take it seriously, not as a sustainability function, but as part of their key strategy. And in the UK, all major companies, all listed companies will need to report in line with TCFD from 2022. Similarly, the phasing out of internal carbon ICE vehicles over the coming years up to 2030 is going to drive in the UK huge growth in electric vehicles, which of course will require technologies in order to help them run cheaply. But really, one of the biggest regulatory changes that we're seeing in the UK and actually other parts of the world is around carbon pricing. So carbon pricing attaches a cost to every ton of carbon that's emitted through the production or generation of a service or goods that's sold in the economy. Now, internalizing these carbon prices will change business cases and existing business models of many existing companies. And as companies start to suffer these costs and see that these costs are coming, we are already seeing significant changes in decision making. And decisions can be around changing the nature of products and services that are offered, or delivering those products and services in a different way. And that's where AI, technology generally, but AI machine learning in particular, we're seeing having a significant impact. So just to share one example in steel manufacturing, ArcelorMittal, major steel company in the world, is working with Energiency, which is an AI startup, which has demonstrated a saving using artificial intelligence of about 10% energy savings in the production of steel, which correlates roughly to 10% savings in terms of emissions as well. And that one intervention that could be put in place really within a couple of months has saved ArcelorMittal a huge amount of money, but also it's saved a huge amount of emissions as well. And this was driven by the introduction of carbon prices for steel. Over the coming years, carbon prices are likely to increase. They've already increased by a factor of 100% over the past year in the EU and the UK, from around 25 euros to 50. But also the sectors that suffer carbon prices will be broadened in the coming years, and that's part of the EU's Fit for 55 legislation. So just to wrap up in the UK, as you can see on this slide, the nature of investment is increasing massively. And actually in the UK, a relatively mature market in this area, the sectors that are attracting venture capital are quite broad. So all the way from forestry, agriculture and land use, mobility and transport, and energy as well. And what we see in China is actually, because it's a less mature market in some ways, this spread is a little bit more focused on transport. Bringing out a couple of points that I mentioned earlier, China is at a slightly earlier stage in its climate tech journey, largely just because there's so much potential in China to develop this area and to drive decarbonisation, both in the country itself and globally. But again, in China, regulatory and policy-wise, decarbonisation is rising up the agenda, and there's more focus being put onto it. And as you can see here, venture capital in China is really focused at the moment on mobility and transport. China is the world's largest EV market. Around 50% of the global fleet already is based in China, and there they aim for 20% of new car sales to be electric vehicles by 2025, only 4 years away. And this will have significant knock-on effects in terms of what needs to happen in China, and then also the technological investments that are going to drive that change, such as charging infrastructure and battery replacements, all of which are going to lead to major changes across the economy with secondary and tertiary implications. So just to wrap up, there are 4 areas where we think that China and the UK can work closely together, developing the relationship and driving decarbonisation and value of both countries. The first is around knowledge sharing. Both Chinese and the UK have excellent educational institutions, a really rich startup space with lots of integration and sharing of knowledge between various hubs. And the more we share knowledge across the UK and China, and frankly, globally as well, the faster we'll move on this agenda. Secondly, around investor visibility. So events such as this and forums such as this will help drive those connections and facilitate sharing of knowledge and also capital. Unlocking scale is a key point. So for UK organisations, clearly opening up the Chinese market will allow huge opportunities for growth, but also to bring technologies down the cost curve. And what we see time and time again, and we saw this in the renewable sector, such as with wind turbines and solar, the scale of the Chinese market and manufacturing capabilities bring these technologies down the cost curve and then enable a positive reinforcement loop to quickly scale these markets and make them feasible for other parts of the world. And finally, around trade cooperation, the more trade cooperation there is between the two countries, the more this scale will happen, the more there will be knowledge sharing, and it will be a huge enabler for driving this agenda forward over the coming years. So that brings the end to this presentation, and I'll pass back to Jana.
Thank you, Rafi. And it's really fascinating to see how technology can help us meeting the net zero targets. And some great examples of companies already actually working towards this goal in the tech sector. And I think you highlighting some of the future priorities we should be focusing on to drive actually UK-China collaboration in net zero tech set the scene perfectly for our first session of today's event. which will be focusing on covering the wider trends in net zero tech in both countries, including key market drivers, policy trends, investment climate, and technology trends. And we will be also discussing what should policymakers do to promote UK-China collaboration. The session is moderated by Mark Headley, Director of Knowledge Economy at CBBC. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Jana. Thank you very much. And yeah, it's been already. I've made a stack of notes from Ravi and Tony as really fascinating insights there around the wider picture of the path to tech, the path to net zero, and the role of technology. Many of you will know me. I'm a director at the China-Britain Business Council. I look after tech and innovation, and collaborating very closely with Tech UK on the UK-China Tech Forum. So this session is split into two parts. We are first starting with a fireside chat with Stuart Wood, the Managing Director of Oxford Instruments Nanoscience. And then we're going to move on after that to a panel discussion hosted by Ting Zhang of Crayfish, focusing specifically on the subject of adaptation and resilience. Just to frame this, so this event is also part of a series of events that CBBC is running in the run-up to COP26, which will culminate in a report which we're publishing, which is really showcasing those examples of UK-China collaboration. So Ravi talked about the importance of sharing knowledge and trade cooperation. So that's exactly our focus. And the adaptation and resilience section of that report is sponsored by Oxford Instruments. So just briefly to introduce Stuart Wood. Stuart is the Managing Director at Oxford Instruments since 2020. He has a long and distinguished career working in the technology sector for a number of different companies, focused on an array of emerging technologies. And at Oxford Instruments, well, I'll let Stuart speak to the heritage of Oxford Instruments, but clearly it's a leading UK technology innovator that's at the forefront of innovation across a whole array of areas, including energy, new materials, quantum computing, etc. So with that, Stuart, I know you're suffering with a bit of a cold today, but I wonder if you might want to start just by telling us a little bit more about Oxford Instruments. I'm sure that many people on the call will be familiar, but those in China perhaps not as familiar with the business.
Absolutely, love to, and thank you, Mark. Listen, good morning to everybody in the UK, and good afternoon to everyone in China. It's a pleasure being here. Oxford Instruments has an incredible history. We were founded in 1959. In fact, we were the first commercial spin out from the University of Oxford, which is very exciting to think about the age and the depth of that know-how. We actually delivered the first MRI machine back in 1980. In fact, we have since gone public on the FTSE in 1983. And last year, if you sort of get a sense of scale, we're about 1,600 people globally represented around the world with revenues about 318 million. So, and our focus more than anything is as Mark highlighted, it is about delivering products and scientific equipment and elements to enable greener products, really healthier sciences, but also connecting the world and driving scientific understanding at the most fundamental and applied way for that we advance all of our research and understanding as researchers, as humans, as a culture.
Great, and so it's really interesting. I mean, I've been to Oxford Instruments, and I've toured this incredibly high-tech factory, and I know that you also have operations around the world. We talked about with Ravi and Tony some of those emerging technologies around electric vehicles and so on. But I wonder, where do you at Oxford Instruments, what do you see as being the most exciting technological advancements that really have that potential to make a material impact on the global drive towards tech zero?
Absolutely. It's funny when I think about climate change, one of the immediate things that comes to mind is my children, right? I think we all think about our children when we think about, the state of the world and what do we need to do. And one of the earlier speakers highlighted very clearly that this is the biggest problem facing us, right? This is much bigger than COVID. This is much bigger than any geopolitical situation in front of us. And it fundamentally comes down to science, right? It comes down to the work that determining not only new materials, the way those materials interact with each other, and that gets into the simplest elements of making a better battery. So some of the aspects that we do with regards to Oxford Instruments is our equipment, for example, within nanoanalysis, which is one of our other groups, have worked with BYD and Shanghai University around some of the activities around making better batteries. The focus is understanding that chemistry, right? If we can get the chemistry correct and we start to understand how that efficiency works, then we can actually improve and move forward. Fundamentally, climate change is a perfect example of how little we as humans know about our natural world. And that includes the chemistry that makes up some of the changes that we're facing, not only from a climate change standpoint, but also with regards to the advances that we have to do in technology. And it's about understanding that fundamental chemical element and those compositions that allow us to drive change faster.
Yeah, and obviously you're dealing in technologies which are actually, we're talking about often quite fundamental, relatively early stage research in terms of the clients that you're working with, be that research institutes or clients that are doing R&D at relatively early stage. I mean, where do you see the challenges in terms of actually taking this stuff from the conceptual side of developing these very early stage technologies to actually taking them to market, commercializing them, actually leveraging their capabilities to really make an impact? I mean, so I assume that some of these technologies have a very long, period of development. And how what can we do to kind of speed that up? I suppose, given the climate change.
I think that's an excellent question, Mark, and I think to me it really comes down to two things. One, communication and education around the technology itself, but also really focused projects, right? If we talk a little bit about quantum computers, right? I think some of the advantages that we have with quantum computing is really about their natural ability to understand and model nature, right? If I take, a perfect example that's been thrown out there quite frequently is the caffeine molecule, right? Caffeine molecule has 24 atoms, right? In order to model a caffeine molecule, you're looking at having 100 trillion times, the fastest computer in the world in order to model that caffeine molecule. With a quantum computer, you can probably do it with around 160 chips or 160 qubits. Our ability to sort of drive those fundamental changes is what's going to be able to move that needle. And if I take this and I start to look at battery chemistry, for example, there is so much about the solubility and the chemistry behind lithium that we do not understand, that we simply cannot model. I know a lot of the speakers have talked about AI and machine learning, but AI and machine learning are not things that you just turn on a switch, right? In order to actually have AI work, you have to have a large set of known data that you can train the AI model around. It's about being able to bring these together and apply this technology in a way that is not only looking at data, which we agree and should be shared, but also at the same time communicating and focusing on the application of the technology in a very positive way.
Yeah, I see. It's that kind of, it's almost rethinking the paradigm of the technologies that we are, so fundamentally reliant on in the current world. Actually, looking down the line in 20, 30 years time, we may be in a completely different place, and many of the technologies today will be completely redundant by that point.
I think you're entirely right, and I think, Mark, that's the scale of the problem, right? If we don't take action today, these technologies that we're talking about will not help us, right? And it is about that focus. It's about bringing that ability to communicate on specific actions. There is so much about the absorption of CO2 that we don't understand at a fundamental chemistry level, right? The ability that quantum computers have at understanding nature, right? Even on the smallest level today, is things that we could focus on together and collaborate on to drive change and potentially impact certain elements of nature and chemistry that we can actually bring to better on making climate change reversible. Another one which is so amazing is there is so little that we know about fertilizer, okay, and how plants efficiently grow and convert light into energy. These elements are so simple in chemistry that we have not been able to evolve that needle fast enough to understand them. And it's at this point in that we're facing within climate change that we have to now bring to bear some of this advanced technology, quantum computers being one of them, material science being another, as it relates to material analysis, to really understand how do we move forward at the pace that we need in order to meet the goals that we have to achieve as a world.
Absolutely, yeah. Just to bring things back to the today's subject around UK-China collaboration. Now, I understand that Oxford Instruments as a business is very international in focus. I mean, I think that you're primarily led by your sort of overseas exports, sort of very high percentage of exports as part of your business. How do you see? I mean, in terms of international collaboration around these emerging technologies, I mean, what is the state of that? Do we already see a lot of cross-border collaboration and partnerships? And how important is that, I suppose, in terms of Ravi mentioned about this concept of knowledge sharing and how important that was. As a business, how important do you see that for driving this stuff forward?
It is absolutely fundamental. I mean, one of the other speakers, I think it might have been Rafi, mentioned the education, right? A lot of the customers that we deal with have had and are experienced and have been educated globally, right? No matter where they sit, whether they sit in the UK, whether they sit in China, the world is a lot smaller, right? Education has been successful both in China and in the US, and that has really forged ahead some very tight relationships. And from that standpoint, education and that openness is now driving a lot of that familiarity. We have to continue to enable that level of education and sharing, right? I believe that we have to put the priorities in front of us, and those are in fact climate change, and we have to work together to really focus and drive open communication. I think we're certainly at a level of crossroads where we have to look at ways that we focus on things that could make a material difference in climate change. And I think that is some of the aspects of looking at particular focused projects, sharing of information. We do our best to enable that. Oxford Instruments does offer science prizes. We have a science prize in China. We have science prizes here in the UK, as well as Japan and in the US. And we do that in such a way that we enable the new, younger scientists around the world to grow. And it's these kinds of elements that I think the UK has and can do very well. It's what we do at Oxford Instruments that we feel is important, but it's still about continuing to drive that communication and openness. There isn't a magic bullet that solves some of these questions, right? It is about people talking to people. It's about people understanding what the priorities are. It's no different than what it takes to drive a good business. It's about focus and understanding, what needs to be done in a certain priority.
Yeah, and certainly, just speaking to China, obviously, innovation, science and innovation, I think, has become more central as a key pillar, right, of policy in China in terms of promoting a development. Certainly compared to where China was maybe 10 years ago, it is looking at science and technology driven development and has very clear policies in place to promote that, including through STEM education. China's always been pretty strong on maths and science, right? So they have an extremely capable population, and so there's already, I suppose, in China, that kind of interest in these kind of subjects. Where would you see at the moment for your business? What are the big pain points, challenges in relation to China that sort of, I suppose, prevent the business from doing more over there, or kind of collaborating more with Chinese partners?
Well, that's a difficult question. I think from our standpoint, one of the key points that we have to do is continue to drive education, and particularly education, particularly cross-functionally, whether it's with universities, whether it's with government. Technology, when we're at this cutting edge of driving technology, sometimes it's scary, right? But I think fundamentally, if we look back in history, particularly in our recent history, we are making good choices. I think we are making much better choices than we have in the past. And I think the climate change problem is so big and so much, has such a scale of question in front of us, that those questions are pretty dwarfed by anything negative. So I think that the focus is really about driving positive communication and education around the technology and where they currently are. If I take quantum computers as an example, if I look at the scale of their applicability, a lot of the focus today is around fundamentally saving money as it relates to material science research or drug discovery research. If you take drug discovery as an example, the current drug discovery market is about 35 billion. There's numbers being discussed today that quantum computers in themselves could save about 30% in that, right? Now, let's sort of put that into a context as it relates to even energy savings, right? One supercomputer doing a single, let's call it transaction or process, uses 21 megawatts of power, right? That's twice the annual usage of a single household in the US, okay? Right? A quantum computer uses less than 25 kilowatts, right? So, we're worried about the application of the technology, but at the same time, what we have to do is understand that if we focus it, we communicate, we work together, we educate all shareholders, stakeholders, and the larger ecosystem, then we can apply the technology in a fundamentally positive way. It is, very important that we continue to focus that education aspect, both for government, for users, for customers, for universities and academics. And I think that's really the key challenge, to your point, Mark, is understanding the benefits, but also continuing to understand the advantages that they bring.
Yeah, and I'm conscious of time. I know we've got to move on to the next panel, but I think that point around, I suppose there's a lot of discussion at the moment, certainly in over the last year or so, in terms of, the kind of the way in which these technologies can be applied in different ways, some of which are harmful, I suppose, to societies. And I guess it's just that question of, how we square that circle of, collaborating around these altruistic aims of addressing the climate change and, improving wealth, healthcare outcomes, et cetera, with sort of some of those concerns around, military applications and so on. And
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's I agree with you, Mark, and I think, how do we square that circle? I think that's your real question. And I think what it comes down to is education. Some of the concerns around the technology today is whether or not their impact on cryptography or communication. Fundamentally, when we look back in history, there is never one single answer. It takes multiple variables in an equation, right? If I take computers today, we've got classical computers, we've got GPUs, now we've got quantum computers. They all in themselves, and to be honest, the cat's already out of the bag as it relates to GPUs and classical computers. It's going to take a marriage of all those technologies in order to solve some of these equations. And to be frank, if you look at a lot of the technology today and the application of quantum computers, they're not good necessarily at solving some of the math problems. They're better at solving some of the chemistry problems, right? Which I think fundamentally, if we put the focus in the right places, then I think that relieves some of the tension and concerns that might exist today, because fundamentally climate change is a chemistry problem, right? And fundamentally we have to focus on chemistry and drive that in the right way with all the tools possible. So once again, I think you're entirely right, Mark, from that standpoint. It's about squaring the circle and having an open communication on, is it actually applicable and is there any real concern?
Absolutely. Well, I would just like to thank Stuart for joining us today. We have run out of time, unfortunately. In fact, I think we're running over a little bit, so I'm going to move swiftly on to the next panel. So thanks, Stuart. I hope you can join us for the rest of the session. And with that, I will hand over to the moderator for the next session, Ting Zhang. Let me just bring my slides back. Just bear with me one moment. Ting Zhang, who is a long-time China expert from Crayfish, which is a leading agency helping Western businesses to access China markets and access VC funding and various digital solutions. So with that, I'll hand over to Ting to moderate the next session.
Thank you, Mark. So can we have very quickly the next slide? So I just wanted to say that it's great to hear the previous speakers to outline the general and wider issues of climate change, and our sessions and resilience innovations such as high performance computing, big data, and AI can have in mitigating the impact communities. And we have 3 speakers today, and the first is Dr. Rosie Oakes, and I think we go to the next one. So Rosie works in Met Office, and she is a climate change scientist, and she has a range of partnerships she has run in China and other parts of the world. Mark, the slides, the next one, please, on Rosie. And yes, so Rosie is based here in the UK, and the next one, please, will be Paulo. And Paulo is actually based in Beijing. So he's speaking from his office there. And he's the Director of Strategic Partnerships in British Standard Institute. Again, Paulo has a lot of international experience across 5 continents. I wonder what is the other ones missing? Maybe Australia, New Zealand. We will hear from his perspective on from the BSI. And finally, but not least, we have a speaker from North Summit Capital. However, Mr. Dong Lei Yan, as you can see on the slides, is not available due to a change of flight in China. But luckily, we have Fabian Wong step in at last minute to speak to us about what North Summit Capital is doing. And Fabian has a long experience in international capital and also in the digital. Particularly, he has previously led Deloitte Digital and also a global service partner for Ernst Young in London. He's actually based in London. So that's for the speakers. So let's start with the panel discussion. So first, I would like to ask each panel to briefly introduce your company, your activities in China, and how these activities relate to our wider theme today of adaptation and resilience. With the time, so I hope everyone has 2 minutes, please. And to start with Rosie, please. Rosie.
Thank you, Ting. Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Rosie Oakes from the Met Office in the UK. And the Met Office are leaders in weather and climate science. But we take this science and try to make it useful to people, both in the UK and around the world. So in the UK, you might have seen the weather forecast. That's what the Met Office is probably most well known for. But we also provide government and businesses with information about how they can prepare for future climate change. The Met Office does a lot of work internationally as well. We partner with over 1,700 organizations around the world. And specifically in China, we've been working on the Climate Science for Services Partnership in China since 2014. And this has involved a collaboration between the UK Met Office and the China Meteorological Administration and the Institute for Atmospheric Physics. So this gets to some of the themes that have been mentioned earlier today. It's how we bring minds together from around the world to tackle the climate challenge, both in terms of the climate science itself and in terms of how we get that information to the people that need it. So as part of this project, we've worked with partners in China across lots of different sectors, including agriculture, energy, hydropower, and in urban areas. And I think this project and the work that's done at the Met Office really highlight that in terms of adaptation and resilience, we need to know what the climate is that we're preparing for, and that's what we can find out from the climate models that are run at the Met Office in order to be able to adapt to the future that we'll be living in. So that is a highlight of our work, and I will pass back to you, Ting.
Yes, I think it's your work is so important, as we have seen all these disasters in the US and in China recently, the floods. So that is actually very relevant for all of us. Thank you. So the next one, Paulo, would you like to introduce?
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ting. So my name is Paulo. As Ting mentioned, I'm based in Beijing, so very close to our clients and to the markets here in China. I represent BSI. So I'm working at BSI, where the UK's national standards body. It means that we create the standards in the UK. But at the same time, we're also a certification body, meaning that we certify companies against the different standards. And we also provide trainings to the companies in order to help them to achieve those standards. In China specifically, we actually focus on a few areas that are very important for happening in China, specifically on information security, smartness, IoT related, international compliance, and specifically, and more importantly, about sustainability. So we've seen a huge growth in demand for sustainability related services in China in the last 6 months, which is a game changer really in China about this topic. So any company or any services providing solutions to help Chinese companies to achieve their net zero goals are very welcome in China. And one of the things that we do about sustainability is that we actually help companies, Chinese companies is also international companies operating in China, to achieve their carbon neutrality goals. This means certifying them against different standards for carbon neutrality, and also helping them to build a long-term strategy by using standards. And one way that is very important for any tech company or any company in general is the ability to demonstrate their achievements. So how can you demonstrate your achievements to your clients, to your supply chain, to your different stakeholders? And one of the ways to do this is actually to use a third-party organization to certify those achievements and demonstrate this through a standards. So this is very briefly what we do in China, and it's a real pleasure to be speaking today. Thank you.
Thanks, Paulo. I think in what you do help Chinese is acknowledged. So I've switched off the video because my internet signal seems to have a little bit issue, but hopefully you can hear me all right. So next, I would like to invite Fabian to introduce about North Summit Capital and what they do in this area.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Hi, can you hear me? Yep, okay.
Yes.
Yes. Literally, I jumped on 10 minutes before the session, so I'm like diving into the deep end. But it's a pleasure to be talking to all of you. I represent North Summit Capital. I'm the global managing partner and the board of director of NSC. We represent the VC, the money side of things, but in terms of net zero. We believe that there are two keywords in the marketplace right now. It is about survivability and scalability, survive and scale. For many of the early stage clean tech EV related companies, in the market, our thesis is that, between Europe, UK, and China, we believe that there is an opportunity for VC money to be in there, accelerating the growth of clean tech technologies, scaling it from 1 to 10, in the European markets before lifting it off, in bigger markets in Asia, for example, in China. So that's our key thesis, for our next fund that we're building right now. And literally last night, I was having a mid-autumn mooncake festival with my colleagues, in Blackfire. We were actually on the 39th floor looking at the Thames River, and we were brainstorming saying, what could just one single fund do? What could a single VC do to really make a splash? But in actual fact, many of the VCs, if you look at Israel from Teammate, if you look at the US from Y Combinator, in London, you have like Fuel Ventures. There's so many different, VCs from different stages that are trying to do something great and good in this space. And we're saying, don't be kidding ourselves, because most of the VC folks, we're keen to make a return, right? A 3x, 5x, 10x. So we said, literally, if we were able to bring in like-minded VCs, together. Yeah, and this is very key, like-minded VCs together. We could probably pull in, for example, 20 VCs. And this is the strategy from last night, having a bit of baijiu, all right? 20 VCs or 30 VCs together. And if we were able to encourage, the VCs to be working closer together to improve the funnel of early stage net zero or clean tech or EV related companies to be coming in, that funnel would be great. That funnel would be massive in a sense, yeah. And from there, it's not only saying, hey, there are lots of funds that would help you grow, but we are thinking, and because the innate nature of our fund has got a strong core element around artificial intelligence, advanced analytics, blockchain, and fintech, we were thinking about, putting a couple of these accelerators together so that all these funnel of new companies coming in, they have a chance to survive in a more technology infused, world. And instead of every single VC trying to say, I have an AI scientist, I have, a data team, I have a blockchain capability there, I've got my ecosystem or blah, blah, blah that I can put in together, the typical stuff that, VCs would say, we create that kind of, environment, for all these particular early stage, companies to flourish together with their VCs. And at the same time, we overlay the VCs together nicely so that, from early stage to pre-A to A, B, C, D, they do have like a nice escalator kind of a sequencing so that we don't have a break in that sequence from a funding perspective and from a, support perspective. So that's where our fund thinking is at this moment. It is not about our singularity as an approach. We are thinking about taking the UK market to a more cohesive way to bring in the right partners. Rosie, you could come in. Paolo, you can come in. To help actually accelerate the net zero agenda in the global marketplace. And I'm not saying only UK and China. I think this should benefit for everyone. I hope that's okay with a 5-minute jump in kind of thing. Ting, back to you, just in case your profile picture has now changed to videography and we can't hear you. Aloha.
Ting, can you hear? Ting's obviously having a few issues. I'm going to just jump in and take over for a few seconds.
I can hear very well.
Well, this is a tough one, right?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. If the moderator is not talking, we are looking at each other.
Go for it, Ting. Go for it, Ting. If it's not working, I'll pick things up.
Or we can chat to each other, Rosie and Paolo, what did you have for breakfast?
Rosie, maybe we can start with you, maybe just talking us through a little bit more, some of the specific projects that you've been working on in China, and where you kind of see the big, challenges, I suppose, in terms of working across borders with China. What, how have things been working for you, in terms of those projects that you're engaged with?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. Yeah, so we've been working in China for 7 years, but obviously the past year and a bit has been a bit more tricky because we haven't been able to travel to interact with our partners in China. And this is tricky because obviously we want to talk to them about the science and the research that we're doing. Once you get all those brains in one room, you start to have some really interesting conversations. But also we want to talk to the people who will use this information. So, for example, we've been working on an agricultural climate service. So China grows 1/3 of the world's maize, and 1/3 of this is grown up in the northeast farming region. And we want to go and talk to the farmers who are growing the maize in this region and ask, how do you use climate information and how can we better support you? We've been doing some computer learning type research. So just to link back to the tech, there are features of the climate system that we can use to predict whether it will be a good yield year for maize or not. So we've been using computer learning to try and understand that connection a little more, but it's not useful if we understand it and we can't talk to people about it. So I think the challenges over the last year have definitely been communication based. We've had to find technologies that work both in the UK and China. So Zoom has been pretty good. We've also used Blue Jeans and we've tried to use WeChat a little bit as well. But I'd be interested to hear how the others on this call have carried on their collaborations with China through the challenges that COVID has set us, I suppose.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry for the signal. It happens sometimes. So that's great. I would like to just also ask a question about how receptive have you found working with a Chinese partner, particularly when you engage in these projects with the Chinese organizations? And do you have to adapt when delivering project in China? So this one is particularly for Rosie and for Paulo as a foreign organization operating in China in the climate change, very briefly.
Yeah, so I guess I can just add quickly. I think the real benefit of this project that we're working on is that it is an established collaboration between the UK Met Service and the Chinese Met Service. And so we're working together on these problems. So it's not us going and saying, you know, we from the UK think you have to do this. We're really working together. And I think that really helps with the collaboration. One thing that we have been working on in my team is understanding when we need to translate materials into Chinese and how different colors and symbols are perceived differently in China versus the UK. So one example is in the UK, we use the traffic light system. So green is good and red is bad, but in China, red is good. So if we're trying to say, oh, no, this is not good, it's red. And then people are thinking, oh, red, great, awesome, red. So things like that, little cultural things, they're kind of changes that we make between the UK and China. So maybe if I pass to Paulo.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, it was a nice little example, but it says a lot about the differences. So I mean, there are of course clear differences. At BSI we've been in China for 25 years already, and we have offices throughout the country. One advice is we need to use local people to develop the market in China. There's really no other way to do this. And building collaborations in China for this. The Chinese market is very receptive to good ideas, right? So the bottom line is always about what is the value you're bringing to your customers in China, and trying to focus on finding those customers that fit your market. At BSI, we focus on certification and the standards, international standards. So we help, and we've seen a very high demand for companies who wants to become carbon neutral. This has an impact not just for themselves, but also for their supply chains, which might be some of the British companies that may become a supplier of Chinese companies, especially for the large tech companies or large energy companies. The conversation we're having with them is that more and more they will be requiring their supply chains to become carbon neutral as well. Therefore, how can you position your company to fit within that new demand that is surging? The same thing is happening with European companies who are demanding supply chains to become carbon neutral, which again, if you're supplying a Chinese company who is supplying a European company, you're automatically affected by this requirements, which is all extremely positive, especially for any company that has a net zero solution under their arms to offer. And we are BSI, right? So we focus on standards. So standards are a very good way to help to bridge the differences culturally between China and the rest of the world, and the UK specifically, because the standards that provide this common language. We all agree about this is the standards internationally agreed on, and we're all working towards to achieve the standards. So therefore, it really helps to level the playing field and reduce and remove trade barriers between China and the rest of the world. So this is really, this is why we've seen a high demand, especially from Chinese companies wanting to comply with international standards and international regulation. Yeah.
Can I jump in, because I do think that there is a glass ceiling here. I agree to some, but I probably don't agree to some points around the practicality of things. Like Rosie, you mentioned about the color coding. This is only like the tip of the iceberg, because when I look at, and you're talking about the Met Office collaborating, but from my perspective, if you're looking like at a company based out of the UK and Europe, If you are trying to get into the China market, and if the alignment is not done at the earliest stages, number one, from a standards viewpoint, number two, from a business model viewpoint, number three, from a technology viewpoint, I think, even if you want to knock on the China, door, I literally think, it will be just, something splattered on a screen, and then it will just start, flowing down. And this is something quite practical as well. And I brainstormed the sort of like go to China or go to Asia strategy for the European companies. I think it's important that, that thinking, even the founders in Europe or in the UK, that mindset to want to go to China is one thing that we struggle a lot as well here on the ground. So that's one thing. Number two, I think from a standards viewpoint, I think the technological landscape between the European and China markets, as what Stuart was saying, is actually quite different. And how do you actually get that to align? I think that question mark is there, which is, I know maybe there are some incubators earlier that could test out the technologies. Maybe if you're looking at a large state-owned company that is based out of Europe, for example, State Grid or CGN, if they wanted to test it out in European markets first, get that warm and fuzzy feeling over the technology before, taking it over and having a good exit strategy over there. In China, I think all these things need to be precursor. It's not so easy, for an early stage or even an AB stage, company to be heading into China into like, a very, huge environment to play ball. And I know, Paolo, maybe, BSI can help, but, BSI, as you said, is standards, but, operationally, tactically, a lot of stuff, it needs to go through many of these hula hoops, which, I don't think is easy. And I see the fear in many of the companies that I talk to in the European markets. They always say a good sentence, yeah, we want to go there. But, I always wonder, do you really know how to go there if we, don't lay the land out very, very clearly for that? So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. That's actually very helpful. I got a specific question for you, which leads perfectly into that. So can you very briefly talk about the portfolios company you have in China that in this climate change area, which offers collaboration opportunities with the UK?
Yeah, in actual fact, just before you called me to say, Fabian, can you jump onto this? I was actually on a call with one of my portfolio companies. We own a global top 2 drone technology company. So it's not that we have the hardware. We play with any drone hardware. We are focusing more on the software in terms of how the software works in terms of imagery, heat sensing, and we do a lot of work in terms of security. And also, yeah, actually, we were doing the music festival in the Middle East. They want to make sure it's safe. So, the drone technology is used there. But we feel that, the extension of drone technology is around sustainability. And right now, actually, at this moment in time, we are talking to several of the largest, state-owned enterprises and also, some of the private enterprises about how drone technology could help, in the oil and gas pipeline, actually reducing the carbon footprint of, sort of like, checking, 100 kilometers of, sort of pipelines on the ground and underground. And obviously we use different technologies for that. And I think even in the UK, we are actually also deploying our drone technologies with the telcos, because right now there is a clear case that is launched in Cranfield. I can't say too much about the details. It is more about drone as a service. So for example, if emergency services on the highway says, okay, instead of like sending, vehicles and people out there, the drone can actually be your, sort of your scout. It just goes ahead and look at whatever it is, and it reports back whether you need like 5 ambulances, 2 police cars or whatever it is. A lot of these scenarios can be done as what we say drone as a service. And this morning, as I said, from a festival viewpoint, I'm working with one of the Middle East, 6 months, Glastonbury kind of a festival. And we're we're talking about how can we use that to improve the experience, whether, from afar, like 50 meters in the air, we can check on, whether the individual has got a temperature, whether, they are within the boundaries and such. So I think the scenarios for net zero using drone technology as one of my companies, it could make sense. It could make sense. And in actual fact, we are actually doing quite a lot of work globally in 35 countries right now and deploying the solutions around drone technology and sustainability. So this is one of those angles that I think, could be interesting,
Great. China is definitely leading on the drone technology and applications, as we have seen. So now, because conscious of time, I'd just like to ask a quick question for all panels. As you know, UK-China Tech Forum, this forum, one of our objectives is to engage stakeholders, including government agencies, businesses, and influence the policy making to help collaborate, the two countries collaborate better. So any suggestion from the panelists about what you think the government, both sides, policymakers could or should be doing to promote better or wider engagement in the area of climate change? Perhaps Rosie could start, and then Paulo and Fabian, then we finish on this panel.
Yeah, thanks, Ting. I think that's a really good question. And at the Met Office, we're always looking for people that we can partner with so that we can share the climate information that we have and find out new ways that we can apply it to challenges in China. I think one thing that would be really helpful is for policymakers to identify areas of shared research. For example, if both the UK and China really want to focus on how we can make cities future-proof, can we collect more data about how temperatures in cities are changing and temperatures within buildings in cities are changing? And what climate information and weather information do we need to help protect people so they can stay safe? Then we could really focus on that as an area of research. But if they're more interested in, energy mixes or agriculture, then having an area of focus, I think, really helps to, we can then really channel the research and make sure we pick the right partners and stuff. So that would be the recommendation from me. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Paulo.
Thanks. Yeah, from my side, from a standards perspective, what we want to see is it's a more acceptance of international standards being used to be recognized in China, because not every international standard is recognized in China, and at the same time bringing a Chinese standard to the international level. So also to be able to use them and being recognized internationally. This is actually part of some of the work we're doing between the UK and China with the British government and Chinese government to help to accept a wider variety and number of standards between the two countries. This helps, a British company that will be being certified to several standards to actually be able to do business in China, potentially. So this is one of the trade barriers between the two countries that exist, and this is something that will be really useful to solve.
Yes, that's a very good point, because there used to be the standards more like foreign standard into China, but now we're seeing more Chinese standard coming out, particularly like 5G, 6G, etc. And it's important to have that too. Finally, Fabian, we only have 1 minute. Fabian, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I only give you one word, which is one, O-N-E. I think the importance is not about standards, policies, and everything. I think it's more important is how do you influence the life of one person as proof? Yeah. I always think that policies are great, but until you can prove that it changes the life of one person, that you can make it so clear that it changed the life of one person and make it a proof. I think, it looks good on paper, so I would say, policy plus one. How do you show you change the life of one person? And if you can do it, it is more powerful than anything else.
That's a really good point, because if we all talk about climate change as if it's someone else's problem, it will never get changed. But we have to all take it on and do our own bit. Thank you. And that brings the panel to the end. And I will hand it back to Mark.
Thanks, Thanks, Ting, and thank you to all of our panelists. Apologies, we've been running a little bit behind schedule today, a few technical issues, but also just really fascinating speakers. And you know, we're always loath to cut short great sessions such as this. So hopefully we can run more in the future. I just wanted to wrap up by thanking all of our panelists today, all of our speakers, partners and sponsors. Particularly KPMG, which is our main sponsor for this series, and also Oxford Instruments, the chapter sponsor for the Resilience and Adaptation and Resilience session, as well as Tech London Advocates, the Department for International Trade, and of course, colleagues at Tech UK. I would point you in the direction of our website for other sessions on the net zero theme that we've got coming up. And in fact, we have another session tomorrow on clean transportation, which will include KPMG's head of future mobility. We've got the managing director of BYD for the UK and also GXS partners. So a session focusing very much on EV and clean transport. Do sign up. You know, have it open on your desk as you're working. If you're busy, you know, it'll be a fantastic session. If you sign up and can't make it, we can also send you the recording afterwards. We will be sending out the recording of this session as well. So if a colleague or you want to share it with someone, please do so. And if you want to speak to someone at CBBC, if you have any questions for us or any of today's panelists, please do get in contact. All of our contact details are on the website, and I'd just like to finish really by thanking you again, and hope you have a fantastic rest of day. Thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you.